and welcome to the Rational Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Aldo Pucci. This is a weekly show that is broadcast every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern United States time. So thankful that you could join us this evening, and I encourage you to ask questions, to call and ask questions, or if you have comments, you can do that through the Podbean app. Or if you are watching us on Facebook or X or LinkedIn or YouTube, you can type in questions, and I'll do my best to attend to them and to answer them. I'm president of the National Association of Cognitive Behavioral Therapists. We're based here in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, and so we're celebrating our new Steelers coach. And I developed an approach to cognitive behavioral therapy called Rational Living Therapy. I've trained thousands of therapists throughout the United States and abroad in Rational Living Therapy over the past 40 years and continue to train them and to provide supervision, and I'm very thankful for that opportunity. I'm also the author of 2 books, The Client's Guide to Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, which is now in its 2nd edition, and also Feel the Way You Want to Feel No Matter What, which is like a self-help version of The Client's Guide, and you can find both of those on Amazon.com. Our show is broadcast live, as I said, on YouTube and Facebook and X, and you can see the recordings of the show on this as well. Each week we'll tackle different topics like depression and anxiety and addiction, trauma, and so many other topics. I'll show you how to overcome those problems with rational self-counseling. Now, the title of this week's episode is The Hidden Assumptions Running and Maybe Ruining Your Life. In previous episodes of my show, we talked about the ABCs of emotions and the fact that our thoughts cause our feelings and behaviors, not people and things and situations. Understanding and accepting this fact is an important first step on the road to rational self-counseling. As long as we blame our situations, the people around us, and the world around us for causing our feelings and behaviors, we will never experience true emotional freedom. So knowing and accepting the fact that our thoughts cause our feelings and behaviors is a very important first step. But it's not all that we need to know to do well. As a matter of fact, many times people have said to me, well, I understand that my thoughts cause my feelings and behaviors. I understand the emotional ABCs, but I'm still feeling upset and I don't understand why. Well, knowing that our thoughts cause our feelings and behaviors is like knowing that the engine moves the car. But just because you know that the engine moves the car does not mean you know how to diagnose engine problems and how to repair the engine, okay? And so since irrational thoughts cause unwanted emotions and behaviors, it's very important for us to be able to identify irrational thoughts. And so how we can do this, and let me put this up on the screen here for those of you who are watching on YouTube, for example, watching online. What we can use to determine, to assess our thinking and to determine whether our thinking is rational for us or irrational is what we call the 3 rational questions. And these 3 rational questions that I use in Rational Living Therapy are actually a modification of Dr. Maxie Maltzby's 5 rational questions. Dr. Maltzby was my mentor. He trained me originally in cognitive behavioral therapy, and he was very involved with our organization, and we maintained close ties until he passed on in 2016. And so I used Dr. Maltzby's 5 rational questions until I realized it was a good idea to eliminate 2 of the questions. And therefore, I used the 3 rational questions. As a matter of fact, how Maxey developed the 5 rational questions to begin with is one day during a session, someone asked him, and this was like in the early 1970s, someone asked him, a patient of his, hey, Dr. Maltzby, how can I determine for myself whether my thinking is rational for me or not? And he thought that was an outstanding question. But as he described it, his session timer went off and he was saved by the bell because he didn't know how to answer that question. And so he knew he had at least a week to think on this and to give a good answer. And so he developed during that week what he called the 5 criterion for rational thinking, or the 5 rational questions. And so, like I said, he taught me those 5 rational questions, but then I decided to eliminate 2 of those questions. And the first time I presented the 3 rational questions, guess who was sitting in the audience in the front row? Maxey Maltzby. And I somewhat irrationally concerned myself with how he might respond to the fact that I eliminated 2. And so after the training that day, I said to him, hey, Dr. Maltzby, I'm sure you realize that I eliminated 2 of your questions. What do you think? And he looked right at me and said, Aldo, 3 questions are better than none. It's a terrific guy. And so what these 3 questions are a great way to determine, is this thought a thought I want to hold on to because it serves me well, or is it a thought that I want to get rid of and replace it with thinking that works better for me? Okay. So the first rational question is my thinking based on fact? In other words, is what I'm thinking the way things really are? Now, there is a very important fact about how our emotions work, the way we talk to ourselves related to this first rational question. And that is, whenever we talk to ourselves, what we say to ourselves will be one of 3 statements. It will either be a joke, a lie, or a sincere statement. Okay? So in other words, whenever we talk to ourselves, what we say will either be a joke. In other words, we know we're just kidding around, or it will be a lie. We know we are telling ourselves something that we really do not believe. Like, oh, that doesn't matter to me, when we know that it does. Or it will be a sincere statement. We sincerely believe that what we are thinking is correct. Now, we do not act on jokes when we know we're just kidding around. We do not act on lies when we know we're telling ourselves something that we really do not believe. We only act on sincere statements. The problem, though, is that those sincere statements can be very mistaken. So how is a person going to answer this first rational question if they sincerely believe that what they are thinking is correct? They're going to answer it, yes, right? Of course my thinking is based on fact. Do you think I'd waste my time washing my hands 150 times a day if I didn't think I was going to die from germs if I didn't, right? So therefore, we better have some pretty good ways to be more objective about our thinking, to determine if our thinking is actually based on fact or not. There are some very good ways, and one of the best ways is to learn about the cognitive distortions or mental mistakes that people make. In my book, The Client's Guide, I think it's chapter 7, I talk about 26 different cognitive distortions, mental mistakes that people make in great detail. So the more familiar people are with those cognitive distortions, mental mistakes, the ways we can go wrong in our thinking, the better position they'll be in to answer that first rational question accurately. So, for example, if I know that I'm jumping to conclusions, then I know my thinking isn't based on fact. Or if I'm thinking in all or none terms, or confusing needing and wanting, or relying and depend, or as opposed to depending, then I know my thinking isn't based on fact. So the more familiar we are with these cognitive distortions or mental mistakes, the more effective we'll be at answering that first rational question accurately. Okay, so what we're in the best position to answer this question accurately when we view our thoughts as being like hypotheses to be tested, rather than just thinking, well, if I think it, it must be so. Okay, we could be wrong, and sometimes we're thankful that we're wrong in our thinking. Okay, so the first rational question is usually the most difficult to answer correctly because we think we're right, you know. And that's why we're making ourselves miserable or acting in ways that are problematic. It's sincere misery, okay, whenever we're thinking sincere thoughts. But just because we sincerely believe a thought to be correct does not mean it is. Okay. Second rational question is, does my thinking help me to achieve my goals? And so the more you know and recognize what your goals are, the easier it will be for you to answer this second rational question. Now, this question does not apply just to long-term or lofty goals. It can be applied to something fairly immediate, not that big of a deal. For example, I know I'm not going to pass that exam tomorrow morning, so there's no point in me studying tonight. I think I'll just get drunk instead. Talk about creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So any thought that does not help you to achieve your goals would not pass the second rational question. And the third rational question is, does my thinking help me to feel the way I want to feel without alcohol and other drugs? So if a person's feeling depressed, for example, and they're not wanting to feel depressed, then the thinking that produces that unwanted feeling would not pass the third rational question. But now notice how this third question is worded. Does my thinking help me to feel the way I want to feel? We could word it, does my thinking help me to feel happy? Couldn't we? Sure, we could. But if we worded it that way, then what we would be suggesting or implying is that there is only one way to feel, and that is happy. And if you don't want to feel happy, then there's something wrong with you. No, we don't have that agenda in this approach in rational living therapy. So if a person wants to feel angry, for example, then that's their business. I might point out the disadvantages just in case they hadn't considered them, and also might want to make certain that, in fact, they thought that it was a desire and not something they thought they had to feel. But once we have that straight, go for it. Who am I to say you're not allowed? However, if their thinking is contrary to the third rational question, or is contrary to how they want to feel, then it would not pass the third rational question. So therefore, what we teach folks then is that 3 yes answers means it's a rational thought. You want to hold on to it because it serves you well. It's accurate. It helps you to get what you want out of life, and it helps you to feel the way you want to feel. 1 no answer to any of these questions means it's an irrational thought for you. And then at that point, when you determine, yes, indeed, this thought is irrational for me, then that means it's time to develop a new replacement thought. And we're going to talk about that in future shows. Because if we only say this thought is irrational for me, I refuse to think this way any longer because it's irrational for me, but we do not replace it with a rational thought and practice that thought, then we're going to revert back to the only thought we've ever known to think, right? The only way we've ever known to think about what's going on. So therefore, it's very important, because the human brain does not like a vacuum, it's very important for us to replace an irrational thought with a rational thought, an irrational behavior with a rational behavior. Okay, and we're going to get into that. So the 3 rational questions. So we've talked about the fact that our thoughts cause our feelings and behaviors, and thank God for that. We've talked about the fact that sometimes we react so quickly we don't know what we thought, and that's made possible by a reflexive thought, a very well-learned thought, so well-learned, so practiced that now it's stored in the brain, ready for action, so that you no longer need to think it consciously. And now we've also talked about how to diagnose your thinking, how to examine it to determine, is this a thought I want to hold on to because it serves me well, or is it a thought to get rid of and replace it with thinking that works better for me? And I can tell you this, that if you are making yourself miserable, there will be something wrong with that thinking that you can correct and feel better. And by the way, sometimes what happens is what I call distress intolerance. Sometimes people make themselves upset over the fact that they're upset. And so they end up with two problems. Well, actually, three problems usually. Whatever it is that they're reacting to, if it's a problematic situation, they're emotional upset about it, and then they're emotional upset about their emotional upset. Okay. But that's all very correctable, and that's what we teach in rational living therapy, and that's what you're learning, each week on the Rational Living Show. And so the rational questions. So I encourage you to write those down. You can learn more about them on our website, nacbt.org. You can learn more about them in the client's guide as well, or Feel the Way. Okay. All right. So now, with that said, let's talk about the difference between thoughts and underlying assumptions. Okay. And what we're really talking about here is the difference between superficial feeling better as opposed to deep getting better. Okay. Unfortunately, a lot of what is called, and by the way, be sure to ask questions if you have any. You can type them in the comments section. If you're watching on YouTube, for example, or Facebook, and it's supposed to show up on my screen here if you do, or if you're on the Podbean app, you can do the same, or call in, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have. So the difference between feeling better and getting better. One of the illustrations that's often used for cognitive behavioral therapy in textbooks is it depicts a person walking past a group of people, and it shows the people laughing and the person thinking to himself, they're laughing at me. And so how CBT, so to speak, is portrayed is in a very superficial way. And that's how a lot of therapists learn so-called CBT, is in a very superficial way, because what they are taught to do is to teach the person about jumping to conclusions, right? So the person thinks walks past a group of people, they laugh. The person thinks they're laughing at me, and maybe all of us might think that. So they're taught to ask the person, well, do you have any evidence that they were laughing at you? Could it have been a coincidence? Might they have been laughing at someone else or something else? Yeah, sure, I guess so. All right, so this is an example of jumping to conclusions. You might as well just drop it. What I want to know, though, is why is the person still upset about it a week later to tell me about it? And it's usually because they have an underlying assumption, and we're going to talk about this here in a moment, about such situations, and that is to be laughed at is a horrible thing. I can't stand it when people laugh at me. And so if we only help them with the jumping to conclusions, they're laughing at me, but yet they still have this idea it's a horrible thing to be laughed at, what will likely happen the next time they think someone's laughing at them? They'll make themselves miserable once again, right? So that's the difference between, but yet when we help the person to correct this idea that it's a horrible thing to be laughed at, that I can't stand it, I can't take it, when we help them to correct that, they will get better. So that therefore, if they do even jump to a conclusion that they're being laughed at, they might find it to be unfortunate, but they will not make themselves miserable over that fact. Okay? So that's the difference between an underlying assumption between superficial feeling better and deep getting better. Okay, someone asked, sounds like there is a big educational aspect of rational living therapy. Absolutely. The point of rational living therapy, and actually most cognitive behavioral therapies, is for the person to never need therapy again. Uh, and so how they do that is how we achieve this goal is by education, by teaching the client how to counsel themselves rationally, and they can carry that learning with them into any situation the rest of their lives. As long as they remain mindful of it. Yes, indeed, and someone said on Podbean it takes a lot of practice, and there's no doubt about that. It does. So not only do you need to learn these things, you need to practice them. And it's just like anything else. The more you practice it, the more likely it is that it will be there for you when you need it. Okay. Instead, if you don't practice it that much, then you're going to have to think, now, wait a minute, what was I taught about this? And you'll be much more likely to counsel yourself irrationally in that situation rather than rationally. Okay. Someone asked, is an underlying assumption like an attitude? It sort of is. Yeah, and we're going to make this distinction here now, actually. So we're going to talk about the difference between underlying assumptions and thoughts, okay? And why this matters to you in your attempts to counsel yourself rationally. So underlying assumptions are primarily non-conscious. And what that means is that if you ask someone, hey, what do you think about this? It's not likely that they will express to you an underlying assumption. So an underlying assumption is an idea that is in our head, but we don't think much about it consciously. Okay, so we have underlying assumptions about ourselves and the world around us. For example, if you drive down a 2-lane road, you and the person coming toward you both have an underlying assumption about that situation. I'm going to remain in my lane, they're going to remain in theirs. If you did not assume that, if you both did not assume that, there would either be chaos, well, what are we going to do here? Or you'd never get on a 2-lane road, okay? So we operate by underlying assumptions throughout the day. They're the lenses through which we view the world. Right now, if you're sitting down, you have an underlying assumption that I'll bet you didn't think anything about. It didn't come to mind, and that is the chair that you're sitting on is strong enough to hold you, okay? But I doubt that you thought that consciously, but if it had occurred to you that it's not, then that idea certainly would have come to mind. So we have underlying assumptions about ourselves and the world around us that shape our behavior. Underlying assumptions are pervasive. They tend to affect in two ways, either many aspects of one area of your life or many areas of your life, okay? And so I'm going to show you an example of this here in a moment. I've described to you an example of this. A thought, as opposed to an underlying assumption, a thought is conscious, okay? We're consciously aware of our thoughts. A thought is specific to a situation. It's an interpretation of a situation. It's how you see it. And very often, the reason we have this thought, this interpretation of this situation, is because that interpretation is fed by an underlying assumption. Okay. Okay. So I'll share with you an example. Let's say that a wife has this underlying assumption about her husband. He doesn't love me. He doesn't love me. So it's Valentine's Day. On the way home from work, the husband buys the wife a dozen roses, hands them to her, and tells her, "Happy Valentine's Day, dear." Her response is, "Shove them." Now, what might she have thought about the fact that he got her those roses, given the fact that she assumes that he doesn't love her? Well, he might have thought something like this: he must want something, right? Because he doesn't love me, so there must be some other explanation. He must want something. Or maybe I'll bet he's guilty about something. I'll bet he's having an affair and he's trying to cover this up. That's why he's getting me these roses. Or he doesn't want trouble. He knows I'll be upset if he doesn't do something for me, and he doesn't want that trouble. So why does she think this about the fact that he got her those roses? Because of the underlying assumption she has about him, and that is he doesn't love me. So let's say the next day he does something to help her out in some way. Very similar interpretation. He doesn't, he must want something, or he's guilty about something, or he doesn't want trouble. Several days later, very similar situation, very similar interpretation. So she might come to me for therapy and say to me, I have 3 problems that I want to discuss today. However, if her underlying assumption, he doesn't love me, is incorrect, does she have 3 problems, or does she have 1 problem that gives her the impression that she has 3 problems? She only has 1 that gives her the impression that she has 3, right? So sometimes self-counseling and therapy will seem like having a birthday cake with trick candles. Just when you thought you've blown out the problem, here they come back again. And why? Because a person's only dealing with these thoughts rather than the underlying assumptions. So the way people get better in rash living therapy is by correcting mistaken underlying assumptions rather than just correcting mistaken thoughts. Okay? And so now, let's say she has, so notice something here. This underlying assumption, he doesn't love me, is only about her husband, right? It's not about the guy down the street. It's not about her dad. So it's specific to him, but you can imagine how many different situations, aspects of their relationship that would affect. He doesn't love me. But now let's say that she has another underlying assumption, and this one is about herself that feeds the idea he doesn't love me. And that underlying assumption is, I'm not lovable. Now, you can imagine how many different relationships that might affect, right? Not just with her husband. So it's no wonder that she assumes that he doesn't love her. If she thinks she's not lovable, why would he love her? Okay. Now, just because she thinks he doesn't love me, she assumes that, does not mean she thinks something negatively about herself. That's what some people will try to tell you, that if she thinks her husband doesn't love her, she must have a bad opinion of herself. No. She might think he's out of his mind, right? She might think that he has bad taste. So just because she assumes he doesn't love her does not mean she assumes anything negatively about herself. But let's say in this case, that is the case. So I'm not lovable would be even more pervasive than he doesn't love me, because it would affect many aspects of her life, not just with her husband. Okay, so you see how these underlying assumptions are pervasive in a couple of different ways. Okay, all right, now let's see here something. Someone wrote, can an assumption be an opinion? Absolutely, it can be. And by the way, just because it's an underlying assumption does not mean it's an irrational underlying assumption. We have many assumptions that conclusions that we come to about things that we think are fairly stable ideas, and therefore we operate by them unless something comes along to question them, to challenge them in some way, and we're paying attention. So therefore we adjust our assumptions. So it certainly can be an opinion, no doubt about that. All right, so with that said then, when are irrational underlying assumptions a problem? Irrational underlying assumptions are a problem when they are relevant. See, remember that underlying assumptions are primarily non-conscious. So they are these learned ideas, these assumptions that we have that are stored in our brain, but aren't always relevant. But they're just like, it's as if they're sitting there waiting to be relevant. And so when they are relevant, then that's when they shape how we view what's in front of us and how we react to it. Okay? So for example, to be laughed at as a horrible thing wouldn't be relevant unless you're being laughed at, right? Then that becomes relevant and a part of producing the reaction that you have to it. So let's take a look at some examples of irrational underlying assumptions. These hidden ideas, because they're non-conscious, right? These hidden ideas, these hidden assumptions that might be running or maybe even ruining your life. There are many of them, and I've just included a few here for our show today. The first is, I must have people's love and approval, and I can't stand it when I don't. So when would that be relevant? Well, in any kind of situation where a person thinks they're being evaluated, or relationship kinds of situations, and especially if a person thinks that their relationship is being threatened in some way, or someone might disapprove of them in some way. So, but the I must have people's love and approval, and I can't stand it when I don't, is a problem because first of all, when they say I must, my question is, you must for what? What is people's love and approval actually a requirement for? And then work at challenging that. But one thing we know is it's not a requirement for survival. But if you see someone panic over the possibility or over the perception that they're losing someone's love or approval, then you can see that they're equating love and approval with air and food and water, as if not having it poses a life or death situation for them. Okay, and that's confirmed with the rest of the sentence, and I can't stand it when I don't, like it will be the end of me. Okay, so therefore that's certainly an irrational underlying assumption. To be rejected is it now? By the way, a person might say, I like people's love and approval. I sure enjoy it when most people anyhow, love me and approve of me. And there are definitely benefits to those things. That's one thing. But to say, I must have it, I need it, like I will die if I don't have it, that's something quite different. Okay? All right. The second, to be rejected is a terrible thing. Again, now, very often when people call things terrible, horrible, and awful, what they're really meaning is it's so bad, I can't take it, I can't stand it, I need it not be. Sometimes, actually, there are benefits to being rejected because being rejected leads to greater opportunities. We only did not know it at the time. So sometimes it turns out to be a blessing in disguise. But at the very least, what we can say is to be rejected is not something we can't stand. It might be something we dislike, but we certainly can stand it and can take it. The next one, I can't stand being alone or by myself. And this underlying assumption will become relevant when it looks like being alone or by oneself is a possibility, or they're approaching that. And sometimes people, when they experience these kinds of situations, they wonder themselves why they're reacting so miserably to the possibility of being alone. For example, of someone, divorcing them or breaking up with them or possibly dying on them or what have you. They wonder why they're reacting so poorly to it, and it can be because of this underlying assumption: I can't take it, I can't stand being by myself. And so again, we want to take it out of the category of something that you actually can't stand, those things that are life threatening, and put it into the category of something that might be unpleasant for you. And notice I said for you, because there are actually a lot of people who like being alone. They prefer being by themselves. Others might think it's strange, but it's true. And who's to say that there's a requirement that you want to be around others? Okay. The next, I must be competent and successful. So a person is attempting to accomplish something, and they think, I have to be competent at this. I have to be successful at this, or at least that's their underlying assumption. And so therefore, it puts undue pressure on them, and they usually end up doing worse, performing worse than they would if they simply said, my preference is to be competent and successful, whatever those terms mean to the person. I would rather be competent and successful, and that is my goal, but I don't need to, like my life depends on it. And so we're changing this must to a preference. We're changing this need idea to a want idea. Okay. The next is I must have perfect security. And so sometimes with an underlying assumption like that, people will not leave their homes, or they will avoid any kind of situation that they think there's any possibility of having, any kind of danger. I remember when 9/11 happened. Shortly thereafter, Albert Ellis, who was the grandfather of the cognitive behavioral therapies, who developed rational emotive behavior therapy. I can't remember if he wrote an article or gave an interview, but I think it was an article in which he said that talked about people's insistence that they have perfect security. And keep in mind, he lived in Manhattan. That people think that they have to have perfect security, and there is no such thing. So the first problem with I must have perfect security is that doesn't exist on this planet. It doesn't exist, first of all. And secondly, there is no requirement that you have perfect security. Our preference is to be secure, and we're going to talk more about all this, in other shows. There is a preference to be secure, of course. We would rather think that we are safe rather than be in danger. But to think I cannot have any possibility of danger whatsoever, you likely will lock yourself in a closet and might not even do that if you think it's unsafe to be in closets. Okay. The next, I can't stand change. Many people have this underlying assumption. I can't stand change. I can't take change. And therefore they avoid it like the plague. And usually it's a fear of what might happen. It's a fear of the unknown, but fearful things about the unknown. Because if a person just assumed that even though I don't know what's going to happen, I assume that it will all be all good, then they wouldn't fear it. So no, people can stand change. It's just that very often they dislike it. But on the other hand, there are people who love change and think they can't stand monotony. Okay, so we can stand change. We don't like it. You can't count on people. So you can imagine how that underlying assumption would affect how a person approaches people, how well they, or what their attitude is toward people approaching them. if they think you can't count on them, and especially if that's coupled with the idea that I have to count on them because I can't count on myself, then you can see the bind that puts in people in. I can't, you can't count. And also notice how it's an overgeneralization. You can't, as if everyone is equally untrustworthy in terms of being able to rely on them. Okay. I can't depend on myself is another one. So you can imagine how a person would think they would need others to depend on if they think they can't depend on themselves. And so that's why it's an important underlying assumption to work to correct, for sure, and to make the distinction between relying and depending. And we're going to talk about this. Someone said, if you are standing something, that means you can stand it. Absolutely. And one of the best ways, the best proofs of that is you're around to think about it. Sometimes we're around to complain about it. It's so interesting to me how people will say, I can't stand this, but they're around to state that they can't stand it, which proves they can stand it, but they might very much dislike it. Yeah, that's right. I can't be happy unless blank. And people, so the underlying assumption of I have these certain requirements for happiness. Happiness, the only way I could be happy is if I have this in my life, or that in my life, or this person in my life, or that person not in my life. And but the problem with that is a misunderstanding of how our emotions and behaviors work. You might say, my strong preference is to have certain things in my life, to have certain people in my life, to not have certain people in my life, to be able to do certain things, etc. That's one thing. But to say that my happiness depends on those things is to not understand how our emotions work. The only thing that's required for a person to feel happy is a brain and body that are working properly in relation to our emotions, and happiness producing thoughts. That is it. It does not require, happiness does not require any particular situation, period. Okay. Next underlying assumption, I am dumb. When people say I'm dumb, what they usually mean is I am too dumb. So we work at examining too dumb for what, but you can understand, and you can imagine how that would shape how they would approach life and approach tasks. Yeah, if they think, generally speaking, they're not very bright, then that would likely put the brakes on pursuing many things, many options that are available to them, just because they think they do not have the intelligence to achieve those things. Then, of course, there's the idea other people are dumb. So see, sometimes underlying assumptions are about ourselves, sometimes underlying assumptions are about other people, and sometimes underlying assumptions are about the world around us. So in this case, people are dumb. And again, this is an overgeneralization, and it's also what the person really means is that they are too dumb. Well, too dumb for what? And then, of course, we have to take a look at how is that a problem for me? Must I be concerned at their lack of intelligence, even if they aren't very bright? Okay. The next, life must go the way I want. No, that's made up. You might want life to go the way you want, but there is, number one, where's the evidence that it must? That somehow reality must conform to what we want simply because we want it that way. There is no evidence. The next, I should be able to do what I want with no negative consequences. You know what I say? That good luck with that one. There are consequences that come naturally. There are natural logical consequences to our behavior. And then sometimes there are consequences that we do not anticipate. Um, but the fact is that everything has a consequence. Sometimes the consequence is irrelevant. Sometimes the consequence is positive. Sometimes the consequence is negative. I can't stand discomfort. We're actually going to talk more about this in other shows. But I can't stand discomfort leads to people doing just about anything they can to not feel discomfort. Whether the discomfort is a physical discomfort, such as a pain, back pain, for example, or the discomfort is emotional, such as depression or anxiety or anger. Okay, so that's why you see people drink and drug and gamble and do all sorts of things to try to distract themselves from their discomfort. I'm a failure. You can see how that would shape the person's behavior, so they need to work at correcting that. The world is a dangerous place, so therefore I must be, constantly on edge and protect myself. And so, really, I think what a person means when they say the world is a dangerous place is that it's too dangerous for me to function. And so it's important to challenge that. Life is unfair and I can't stand it. Well, where is the evidence that it must be fair? And who determines what is fair and what is not? Life is just the way it is. And so far, you've stood it. Rules don't apply to me. Often people end up in prison with thoughts like that. That they apply to everyone else but to me. That's reality. That would be fine if reality supported that belief, but obviously it doesn't. Same, it would be horrible if I died. We see it with panic. What we see is that a person is equating something with a life or death situation. And so a lot of times when people equate things with a life or death situation, they will say to the therapist, if this happened, I would die. And then the conversation ends at this point because both the therapist and the client think, well, it would be a terrible thing if I died, and that would be the end of that. But what I want to know is, besides it ruining their day, if they were to die, why would that be a problem for them? And to see, and Lord only knows what the person's response might be. It could be, I'm an evil sinner and I think I'm going straight to hell, and that would be a horrible thing. Or it could be, what's going to happen to my family if I die? How are they going to survive? And that would be a horrible thing. Or it could be, I'm afraid of the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen to me, and I'm really scared of that. But who would know unless you ask them? But you can ask yourself those kinds of questions. So I seem to have this fear of dying. What am I afraid of? What do I think will happen? And then go from there to see what your underlying assumptions are. And we see some others as well that you can check out. I cannot resist temptation. Often people who are addicted to various things think that I just can't help my poor self. I can't resist temptation. Success is for everyone but me. People only care about themselves. All men or women are the same. These are various underlying assumptions. Irrational. I must have certainty and stability. I must not fail. Other people must not make mistakes. Other people must be perfect. Others must never be rude or obnoxious. I can't stand it when they are. So there are so many. We could be here all evening talking about all the different underlying assumptions that people disturb themselves with. But what I wanted you to get from today is the fact that we do have these underlying assumptions that are kind of like the lens through which we view the world. And sometimes they're rational, sometimes they help us. But if we're making ourselves miserable, there's probably an underlying assumption there somewhere that is at the heart of it. And so by correcting that, by correcting the it's terrible to be laughed at, you will get better. But if we only correct the jumping to conclusions, I have no evidence that they're actually laughing at me. They could be laughing at something else. The problem with that is that underlying assumption will remain, and it's just sitting there waiting for another situation where you think you're being laughed at, and then you make yourself miserable once again. So the focus is on the underlying assumption on to get better, and we'll talk about the various underlying assumptions that that cause all the different kinds of emotions and behaviors that we're going to talk about. Let's see. Someone said, "Please, please give an example of reflexive thought in relation to an underlying assumption." Yeah, that's a great question, because because the distinction between reflexive thoughts and underlying assumptions is that reflexive thoughts can be very specific to a situation. Like to stop a car, I have to put my foot on the brake. Okay. Whereas underlying assumptions will be pervasive, either pervasive even with a certain situation, just one area of your life, but it'll affect many different aspects of that. So it's really about how pervasive they are. But they both can cause instant emotions and behaviors. Yeah, that's a great question. All right. Okay, well, thank you all very much. Please remember to join us each Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You may watch the recording of my podcast on YouTube and Facebook, LinkedIn, and X, and also listen to the recordings on the Rational Living Show with Dr. Aldo Pucci, wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to visit our website, nacbt.org. Thank you all, and looking forward to seeing you all next Wednesday.